Time for the Daly Planet podcast show. So sit back, relax, and give us a go. Scott and Matt and maybe a guest, undertaking epic podcast. We're gonna ramble on about movies and books and television and directors and film festivals and this really long list of stuff that I know nothing about, but they gave it to me and they really wanted me to read through it. And that's all I can really say about it, but it's gonna be great. The show.
Hello and welcome to the Daly Planet podcast, your weekly podcast for all things music, TV, books, and anything else we feel like talking about. My name is Scott Daly and I'm your host, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Matt Freeman. Matt, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing fantastic, Scott. I'm very, very excited about our topic. It's one of my favorite series that we do here on the Daly Planet. We're doing another Deconstructing Directors episode. And who are we talking about today, Scott?
We are talking about the director Shane Black, originally screenwriter, then transitioned to director in 2005 with Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. And then I think what most people know him for is Iron Man 3, the most successful of the Iron Man franchise. That movie made $1 billion, which is insane. And then most recently, he did The Nice Guys, which came out this year. So we're going to be talking all about Shane.
Yeah, and I have a confession, Scott. I've withheld this until time of recording, just for shock journalism value.
So this reaction right now that I'm about to have will be off the cuff, real reaction. This
is real. So
right.
When you suggested this director, I said, "Oh yeah, I've seen Shane Black movies," and I thought I had. And it turned out that I hadn't seen any of the movies he directed, actually. So I wasn't rewatching the movies this last week. I was watching them for the first time.
That's crazy. And awesome.
Yeah, and it was awesome because I liked all these movies, and I'm really glad that I watched them. But yes, we'll get into them in detail.
Absolutely. But before we get into Shane Black, I just wanted to go through some quick news items with you. The first one, we'll talk about Blade Runner 2049. Matt, did you know there's a sequel to Blade Runner coming out?
Yeah, I'd
heard
this.
Yeah, so this is it's coming out, I think it's next October or something, maybe even further out than that, I'm not actually sure. But Denis Villeneuve, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. He directed one of my favorite movies of this year, Arrival, but he is helming the movie, and he did an interview in French this past week, and said that Blade Runner might not tell us the long question of if Deckard is a replicant. How do you feel about this? First of all, I don't know how they can do that, because replicants don't live very long, and this is supposed to take place years later, so Harrison Ford is in the movie, so how does he be in the movie without revealing that choice? I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. I was always pretty annoyed by the whole Deckard as a replicant thing, because when you have the director say, "Oh yes, of course he was supposed to be a replicant," and then you have the actor who played the character say that's nonsense, I just figured there was some disconnect on some level, and you can believe whatever you want to believe, and there's no real answer. So
right, and I think that's the best. I don't really like Blade Runner as a film. But I do think that the ambiguous ending is a part of it that I like, that you are allowed to draw your own conclusion. So I do like that this movie will not answer that question definitively, but also by now the question's kind of been answered definitively when the director comes out and weighs in on it, which I think he should not have done. But
yeah, well, and also I just don't know why you'd make a Blade Runner sequel.
Yeah,
like
that's
in
true.
general. There's the Blade Runner has all these rich themes about this idea that you could basically fabricate a person, and then that person would be not only indistinguishable from like a quote unquote real person, but maybe even better and more human in some ways. That's all great. That's all fine and good, but you don't have to do Blade Runner to do that, and you don't have to have Harrison Ford to do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, just don't stop making sequels, guys.
Yeah. The only reason I'm remotely interested in this movie is because of the director. I know you haven't gotten a chance to see Arrival yet. You will eventually, and I really think you should, because it's incredible. Denis is a very skilled director. So that's the only reason I'm excited about this movie at all. But
yeah, I mean, I'll probably end up seeing it just because I like sci-fi, but
Yeah. All right. So there's really no other news, but there's been a lot of trailers coming out because we're now in the time of year where trailers for this spring and summer start dropping. So we have a few trailers that I wanted to go through with you and just do our regularly quote unquote scheduled game. By regularly, I mean whenever I feel like it. Where we look at trailers and decide if we are in or out on this movie. So first up, we've got The Mummy. This is the Tom Cruise franchise vehicle that is hoping to kickstart the Universal Monsters franchise, which is attempting to do what the Marvel Cinematic Universe did, but with Frankenstein and Dracula and The Mummy. So, Matt, what did you think of the Mummy teaser trailer?
You know what? I'm in because Tom Cruise. Because I was just saying Tom Cruise is responsible for so many great things that I love, and also I'm just interested to see how they open up this monsters universe, because for all we know, it could be really fun.
I think that's fair. I think this trailer is terrible.
Yes, this is a trailer, but trailer. I agree.
It's like, I guess Tom Cruise dies. Like the trailer shows Tom Cruise dying in a plane crash, sitting in a morgue and coming back to life. So that's gonna happen. And I don't know. I think you're right that seeing how they're gonna try to weave a expanding joined universe out of these films is going to be interesting. It makes me miss the Brendan Fraser Mummy, which was silly and adventurous and fun, and this seems like super serious, and the Mummy is a hot girl that's destroying cities, and it's, I don't know. I miss Brendan Fraser.
Yeah,
bring back Brendan Fraser.
One was, that was like a fun adventure, and in this one we get like a shot of 6 body bags in the first 20 seconds of the trailer.
Also, remember the original Mummy, how it was a scary movie?
Yeah.
It's not even close to what we're doing anymore. But
yeah, well, this is just an awful trailer. Like it doesn't even know what emotions it's trying to entice you with, other than Tom Cruise.
Yeah, well, it definitely has Tom Cruise in it, so it got that across.
Right, and Anthony wait, am I confused? No, sorry, we're not there yet.
But all right, so let's move on to the next movie, which is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. This is James Gunn's sequel to my favorite movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe still. So what did you think of the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 teaser? Not trailer, it's just a teaser. But are you in on this movie?
Oh, I'm way in. I mean, from the trailer, it really seems like they understand everything they did right with the first movie, and it seems like they're doing everything right tonally, but it also seems like they're not just copying the other movie. It seems like, from the scant elements of plot that you can pick up, it looks like a different story. There may not be a big glowing blue light in the sky that they have to blow up to save the world.
But there might
be, on the other hand, so we don't know.
No, I agree with you. On top of being very excited for this movie, I do think this teaser was just so well done. I mean, they realize what they have with Baby Groot, and they are fully embracing it, and it's all really great. I still think the Drax, even though how much I love the Baby Groot stuff, the Drax scene is my favorite. Like, he is downright hilarious, and like, I mean, the best part about Guardians of the Galaxy was watching these characters play off each other, and this teaser, that's really all they showed you, is the interaction between all these characters, and I'm excited. I hope it's really good. And that comes out this May, I think.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So next up, Matt, Transformers 5. Transformers: The Last Night. This is directed by Michael Bay again. He said for the last 3 movies that this is going to be his last movie. But he continues to come back to the franchise. But this is the first one that was written by the shared universe writers room for Hasbro. So they're attempting to do a Hasbro shared universe, believe it or not. And this is the first movie to come out of that writers room, where they're trying to link all these different Hasbro toys together into a shared universe. Matt, what did you think of Transformers: The Last Night?
It sounds like a disaster. I'm gonna be out in the sense that I'm never gonna see this in the theater. but I do have enough of an investment in the Transformers franchise purely due to that book length essay on the subtle subtext of the Transformers films that that I just have to see how this pans out and whether all these deep hidden conspiracy theories that the woman who wrote that was talking about turn out to be true, because it seems like some of them perversely might be just from looking at the trailer.
Oh yeah, I mean, the Optimus Prime becoming a raging psychopath seems to be heavily highlighted in this trailer. I mean, I don't know if you ever saw the fourth movie. It was an attempt to reboot the franchise, kind of, because it got rid of Shia LaBeouf and put in Marky Mark. That movie was somehow even more of a mess than the second and third ones. I think I'm in, not because I think this is a good trailer. It's not a good trailer. It's not going to be a good movie, but I am fascinated by Michael Bay, and I'm fascinated by this series. So you're right. It's the type of thing I'm going to see just to measure the madness. Yeah.
Right. I mean, he always knows how to shoot action scenes. I guess if just for the eye candy, it's might be worth a look.
Yeah, you might not be able to tell what's going on, but
it's true.
It's cool looking.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's Transformers: The Last Night. I don't know when this movie comes out. I don't think it's next year. I think it's 2018, but maybe it isn't. I don't know. You're right. I'm probably not going to see this in the theaters either, but I will see it. And last but not least, we have the first trailer for Baywatch. This is the film based off of the television show starring Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. And Matt, what did you think of this trailer?
It looks pretty funny. The Rock has definitely won me over as a comic actor, and so I think if you the listener haven't watched this trailer, maybe you should, because when I first heard a Baywatch movie, I thought it would be a kind of a straight take on Baywatch, but it's actually kind of a comedy making fun of Baywatch, like a spoof basically, and It seems pretty funny from the trailer, which can be misleading, but yeah, I think I'm in.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, when I first heard of this movie, I agreed. I thought it was going to be a straight and serious interpretation of Baywatch, which I think is the exact wrong thing to do, but I would not be surprised if Hollywood did it. But yeah, this has a very 21 Jump Street-esque vibe to it, in which they take an old popular television show and turn it into kind of a meta commentary, making fun of that show while also calling back to it. So, I mean, is this derivative? Yeah, but you're right. I mean, The Rock is hilarious. I think Zac Efron is hilarious. It looks interesting. It's hard to say I'm like in. Like, I'm not going to rush out to see this movie in the theaters or anything. But yeah, I mean, it has my attention at least. And you're right. I mean, I'll basically watch anything The Rock does at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too.
All right, so that's it. Those are trailers. Right now, as we speak, I believe the Spider-Man Homecoming trailer is debuting on Jimmy Kimmel Live. So we can't weigh in on that one yet, but I am very excited for that. So maybe we'll talk about that at a later date. But fortunately, with our timing, it just didn't work.
Yeah, maybe we'll do a reaction post or something.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know about you. I mean, Spider-Man is my superhero, so I'm very excited to see him come back to Marvel and hopefully be done not terribly.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, me too.
We will see. All right, let's move on, Matt, to the main event. Let's talk about Shane Black. So, basically, if you haven't listened to these series before, what these deconstructing series are is Matt and I sit down and we watch all the movies that a particular director has directed, and then we sit and talk about them and try to decipher who the director is, what his themes are, what he likes to talk about and do in his films, and why we like that director. Matt, this is, I think, the fifth or sixth one we've done now.
Yeah, maybe fifth. I think we did one in the early days that we didn't call a deconstructing, but
yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
But I have noticed that with this one, this will be whatever number it is. We've done a whole lot of white dudes, so I think in the future maybe we'll try to get a little more diverse with it. But
yeah,
the sad truth is that the majority of directors working in Hollywood are white males.
Right.
But,
yeah. To be fair to us, we're just sampling from the population that's available.
Yeah. But I think we will strive in the future to try to dive into some more diverse directors. But for the meantime, let's talk about Shane Black, because I love Shane Black. So, like we said at the top, Shane Black is a writer turned director. He was born in Pittsburgh to the son of a printer, which is what got him involved in stories in general, because he used to read stories provided by his father. They eventually moved out to California. He went to UCLA and majored in film and theater, and started off. He wrote a script that got the attention of Fox, and they hired him on to just rewrite and to doctor scripts within the Fox studio. And that is until he wrote Lethal Weapon, which when he was 22 years old, sold for $250,000, Matt, which is crazy. Can you imagine having that much money when you're 22 years old?
No, and wasn't that a record at the time?
I don't think that one was, but he did go on. Like, since that moment, every one of his screenplays sold more and more. He followed that up with The Last Boy Scout, which sold for $1.75 million. That was a record. And then eventually he sold The Long Kiss Goodnight for $4 million. That also broke his previously established record. Both those movies ended up not doing very well, but in the late 80s to early mid 90s, he was the screenwriting person. And then I guess those movies were not commercial successes, and the pressure was mounting, so he stepped away from screenwriting for a while, didn't do anything for 10 years, came back with his first movie he had written, and this time he directed with Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, and since then has been writing and directing a few movies, which we will get into. But before we jump into the movies he directed, I did want to touch on the movies he was just the screenwriter for. I don't want to spend a lot of time on these, Matt, but I think these really help set the tone for just the type of director and writer he is. So the first one, obviously, is Lethal Weapon, which I think everyone listening probably knows about Lethal Weapon.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty fundamental pop culture icon type thing.
I mean, it created the buddy cop film.
And there were like 4 sequels or something on that order. So
none of which Shane Black had anything to do with. The story with Lethal Weapon is he wrote the sequel. In his sequel, he wanted Riggs to die. It was much more violent and dark than they wanted. So they ended up not using his version of the script at all for that. So then he just kind of stepped away from the franchise. He's not been involved on any of the other movies. But so I watched Lethal Weapon again, and when I was watching the movies that he wrote, I was really just trying to focus on the writing of the film, obviously, because we're here to talk about Shane Black specifically. And I think the thing that most surprises me, and I think we talk about this a lot with the directors, is seeing this early of the work, like how much his style and his themes are already established. Like this movie, like every one of his movies, this is kind of a black, violent comedy. It has the noir elements. It has the buddy cop elements. He loves kidnapping. He loves Christmas. Everything that he is as a writer and director is in this movie. And it's not as formed as his later works, obviously, but it's all here.
Yeah. One thing I noticed watching this movie, the most recent time I watched it, was that everyone, like all of the characters are naked when they're introduced, or not all the characters, but the main characters. Like you have the murder victim who sets off the story, like jumps off the balcony and she's naked, and then we cut to, I think it's Murtaugh in the bathtub and he's naked, and then we cut to Riggs and he's waking up in his trailer and he's naked, and it's like this is obviously intentional. This is just the kind of thing that Shane Black does, where he's putting in these sort of subliminal meaningful elements into his, and he does this a lot more when he's the director, because then he's controlling everything instead of just the script.
Right. And that I did get a chance to read the Lethal Weapon script today, and you are correct that that's all in the script. I mean, that's written down. I found, I don't know about you, I found the scene where Murtaugh's sitting in the bath naked and his entire family busts in. I found that very strange. Because, like, he's not sitting in a bubble bath. I mean, he's sitting in just flat water, completely naked, and, like, his children, his 17-year-old daughter is sitting there, like, sitting on the side of the bath, like, talking to him. I'm like, I mean, the water is clear. Like, there's his junk is just right there. Yeah. I just thought that was very strange. In the script, by the way, it specifically mentioned he grabs a towel to cover up, which they did not do in the movie. That's a very interesting thing I noticed.
That's funny.
But yeah, this movie, I mean, and it really holds up is the surprising thing. It's very good. Like, I don't want to get into the acting because it's not really specific to Shane Black, but I mean, Mel Gibson, for all the problems I have with him, is absolutely incredible in this movie. And when you read the script, you know, I can't, like, it's tough to do because obviously I've seen this movie so many times and he is the role, and when I read the script, I just see his performance. But I mean, he really is true to the character as it was written, so it's very impressive.
Yeah, and obviously the dialogue is so good that you kind of don't notice it, if that makes sense. I mean, yeah. That's almost the definition of good dialogue, is if someone were to say, like, hey, is the dialogue in Lethal Weapon particularly good? You might just be like, no, what do you mean? And then you realize, like, well, actually it's so perfectly, like, realistic and fluid and snappy, and also, like, everything every character says is perfectly characterizing that character.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one thing that he does very well, and this movie is a perfect example of it, is the two introductory scenes for these characters. Roger Murtaugh's introductory scene is that awkward bath scene we're talking about, but his whole morning in that house, like, perfectly defines who he is as a character. He's the family man, he's old, he's turning 50 and not really cool with it, and he's dealing with the craziness of his family life. And then you go over to Riggs, who his real character-defining moment is when he does the drug bust in the Christmas tree lot, where he basically, like, just completely puts himself in harm's way, almost dies getting shot by these drug dealers, and is completely cool with it. You're right. It perfectly sets up who these two guys are. And it does do it in dialogue, but it doesn't do it in expositionary dialogue. It's just it's just how they're reacting to the situations they're put in. It's very good. It's very smart writing, especially from someone who's freaking 22. He's probably actually like 20 when he wrote this movie. Yeah,
it's pretty annoying.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to comment when you were talking about his bio that, like, the job of being a script doctor seems like the best job in the world if your ambition is to be a script writer, because you'll be digging into lots of scripts and understanding what makes things work and what makes things not work. And I feel like that's like a quick hack to being able to write really well really quickly.
Absolutely. The one thing I will say about he completely rewrote the script. The original was much darker, and it dealt with it had, like, there was cocaine, like, raining from the sky on the Hollywood sign. If you want to get into Shane Black's warped view of LA, which I think we will get into with these future movies, but
inevitably,
but yeah, that's Lethal Weapon. Obviously, it did very well. It went on. The other thing I want to say, just real quickly, on reading the script, is his style is very well known within the screenwriting industry, and it's very evident in this because he kind of talks to the reader. He's very jokey in his descriptions. I think one of the sections was describing one of the mansions in one of the scenes and said, the kind of mansion I will buy if this movie is a hit. It's this kind of thing, like, when you're responsible for reading hundreds of screenplays to decide, like, if you're a producer or an intern for a producer, most likely, this is the kind of stuff that, like, catches people's attention and makes them laugh and keeps them engaged in your story as you go through. So I think that's part of his success is not just, he's very good at the dialogue, but his descriptions in the actual screenplays are funny and quippy and attention getting.
That's cool.
Yeah. So we'll quickly move through these next movies. The next movie he did was The Last Boy Scout, which was directed by Tony Scott, the late brother of our favorite Alien director. This movie, the IMDb summary is a down-and-out cynical detective played by Bruce Willis teams up with the down-and-out ex-quarterback played by one of the Wayans brothers. I never remember which one it is. I think it's Damon Wayans. And to solve a murder case involving a pro football team and a politician. So this movie was the one he sold for almost $2 million. This movie, I don't know if you've ever seen it, Matt.
No.
I enjoy it, but I don't want to talk about it too much because it's hard to tell how much of this movie is actually Shane Black because production was plagued with problems. The producer, I forget his name. Both the producer and Bruce Willis were not happy with the screenplay as is. Bruce Willis was coming off the success of Die Hard. The Last Boy Scout, an important plot element was his relationship with his wife. Bruce Willis said, that's what my last movie was about. I don't really want to do that again. They demanded rewrites. Tony Scott was forced to film and direct scenes that he didn't like, but he didn't have a choice. Shane Black had to rewrite so much of the script on demands. So it's tough to say that this is a Shane Black movie. But there are still elements in this movie that are very similar to the overall Shane Black style. You have Bruce Willis plays a former Secret Service agent who saved the president, but then was later kind of disgraced, and he's now an alcoholic private detective who gets pulled into this vast conspiracy theory with pro football gambling. Meets a quarterback who they originally don't trust each other, then become a partnership and do everything together. So it's very much in the Shane Black kind of neo-noir style, but it's a movie that was plagued with problems, didn't do very well. Bruce Willis and Marlon Wayans? I don't know.
It is Damon. I checked.
It is Damon. Okay.
Yeah.
They hate each other. They had to play friends in this movie. They hate each other. They will never work with each other again. They will never talk to each other. They did not like each other at all. So
interesting.
I don't know if that shows in the actual end result of the movie. I still think it's a good movie. I still think I can see the Shane Blackiness of it. But yeah, that's The Last Boy Scout. So again, he came right out the gate with Lethal Weapon, had a huge hit, and then we'll see that his next movies, while quite good, just never really found an audience. The next one is Last Action Hero, which came out in 1993, directed by John McTiernan. Matt, I think you've and I have talked about this briefly on the podcast before, maybe in like the recommendation section or something, because I remember us talking about it.
Yeah, what happened was I just kind of randomly watched it again, and obviously when you see something as a kid, you're appreciating on one level, but when you watch this movie as an adult, you definitely notice how like kind of brilliant it is in its satire and its layers, and how it's kind of communicating different things on different layers, and it really masterfully changes tone from kind of silly and comedic to dealing with some very heavy themes at some points, and it's actually quite deft at that. It
really is. The IMDb summary of this movie, for those who haven't seen it, is with the help of a magical ticket, a young film fan is transported into the fictional world of his favorite action film character, who is played by Arnold Schwarzenegger. This was 1993, so this was like the height of Arnold Schwarzenegger. I think Terminator 2 had just come out. Like, he is in probably the highest point of his career at that point. So him appearing in this movie is actually pretty huge. Yeah. But yeah, so this was not a Shane Black original script. He came in to do a rewrite of it. From what I understand, he did change it quite a lot. I think the premise is still there, but from what I understand, the original film mostly took place within that film within a film. So everything we see that takes place in the quote-unquote real world is Shane Black's addition to the script. And let me tell you, thank God he did, because I think you're right that tone change from when you're in the funny satire of the action films, which actually is quite good, moving to this very interesting like examination of our world versus the action ideal. Like, it gets really meta and interesting, and that all very much feels like Shane Black. Like the main villain, played by Charles Dance, like murdering someone in cold blood on the street, and then like shouting about it to the world and no one gives a shit. I mean, that's so Shane Black. Like, that's definitely a scene that was written by him.
Yeah, I agree. And toward the beginning too, they kind of put the kid into a lot of really realistic bad situations, and it really makes you emotionally connected a lot more than you kind of expect to be in a silly action movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah, and I think it helps contrast how ridiculous the world of film action is. And I think the smartest thing this movie does is at one point within a film, you kind of forget that you're in a movie. Like that whole dramatic conclusion of like the body with the nerve gas in it is shot and performed as if that's just a straight action scene. And you kind of forget that this is poking fun at the whole action scene trope, and it's just they're fully committed to this whole thing as this is just an action scene within the movie in a movie, and it's really well done. It's really glaring to see how differently it was shot when you're in the real world versus the film world.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad his script added those additional scenes in it. I think it's really upsetting to me that this movie did not do well, because I think it is really great, and I think it has found an audience on home video. But
yeah, it's a weird movie. I mean, I'll be
it is.
Be honest about that, because it's not really fully an action movie, and it's almost too serious and self reflective to be a full on comedy. Like there's a lot of parts of it that just aren't funny. Yeah. They're not supposed to be. It's really just this weird meta thing that's very enjoyable for what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so the last movie that I wanted to touch on before we move into his directorial movies is The Long Kiss Goodnight. This is a 1996 movie. This is the movie that he sold for $4 million. This was Samuel L. Jackson and Gina Davis. The IMDb summary is: a woman suffering from amnesia begins to recover her memories after trouble from her past finds her again. That's really kind of a hook summary. Really, she's an international assassin, and she is now playing homemaker because she loses her memory and has a daughter now. And I didn't get to watch this movie again because for some reason, Matt, I do not understand why this movie is not available to stream legally anywhere on the internet. I couldn't find it on Amazon. I couldn't find it Netflix. Any of the places I normally go to stream these movies for this podcast didn't have it. So I don't know why this particular movie is just not available. I tried to look. I got desperate and was like, maybe I'll buy the Blu-ray. I don't even think I could find the Blu-ray. I think there's a DVD available, but I don't know if this movie's ever come out on Blu-ray. So I can't talk about it in as much detail as I wanted to. I remember liking this movie very much. It's very different. Shane Black really dives into some complicated themes with this character. This woman who, was one thing, lost her memory, became something else, and is kind of battling internally with who she is as a person. If she's the cold-blooded assassin, is she the homemaker who loves her daughter? And I mean, the movie kind of says at the end of the day, she's a combination of both. But it's really diving into these really interesting themes, and I really wish I had gotten to watch it again, but I just couldn't find a way to do it.
Yeah, I also haven't seen it in a really long time, so I can't really comment too much other than it does seem to have a lot of pathos, which is typical for Shane Black.
Yeah, it is. And I think that's something I want to get into, especially when we talk about The Nice Guys in a little bit. There's a lot of, Shane Black does a lot of black humor, but a lot of times people think his movies are cynical and depressing. And while I think Shane Black's view of the world is very, the world is kind of a shitty place, I do think that you can tell he has a great respect for people and relationships, and say that while the world as a whole is a shitty place, you can find your place in it and be happy and move to some place of understanding and happiness. Like Lethal Weapon, Riggs is a suicidal wreck because his wife died. he, by the end of the movie, like, there are terrible people in this world, like, they have to become horrible killers in order to defeat these bad guys, but Riggs finally gets to a place where he can begin to be happy again and move on. So I think to write off Shane Black's style as negative and cynical and the world sucks and is terrible is doing a disservice to his work. And we'll get into that as we go more, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of his protagonists could be classified as being people who've been badly mistreated by the world, and their arc is usually some kind of, they get to win.
Yeah.
And you want them to win, and it feels really good to you that they win because they are coming from the bottom.
Yeah, and I think their winning isn't always the winning we would expect. And I think you'll see, like, in Nice Guys, I think we'll definitely see that. And it really, it's funny because there was an article on Birth Movies Death Today talking about that movie, talking about how some of the interpretations of it, that the ending of the movie was negative, which it's crazy to me. But we'll get there. First, let's talk about his directorial debut, which is 2005's Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. This is kind of a love letter to the old, like, detective novels, figuratively and literally, because part of the plot hinges around serialized detective novels. This is starring Robert Downey Jr. And Val Kilmer and Michelle Monaghan. I think this was her first movie. I think she's obviously gone on to great success, but I think this was the first movie she was cast in as an actress. So the IMDb synopsis of this, obviously very simple, is a murder mystery brings together a private eye, a struggling actress, and a thief masquerading as an actor, which is a very simplistic way to describe this movie. But here's the thing about this movie, and I think you'll agree with me, Matt, it's very difficult to describe. Yeah.
I mean, it's a very complicated kind of twisty noir plot involving different characters, different motives, and then things aren't what they seem to be, etc. And it's really, none of that is really what's the most interesting thing to talk about anyway. I think it's more the some of the affectations, like the fact that the character is narrating it to you, and it's like very, very self-aware that it's a movie, and they even make jokes about like movie tropes while he's telling the story. He'll be like, there's like a throwaway scene basically, and then he's like, oh, you think that's gonna be important later? They show the guy in the scene and he says the thing, and they just throw that scene in for no reason, and you're like, of course you as the movie viewer know that when you see a character randomly giving exposition, that's what it is. It's setting something up, and he, by lampshading it, which is, by pointing it out, he just makes you laugh at it, and then you're sort of with the movie instead of like standing off from the movie. Yeah. Which I think is a great tool for sucking you in and making you feel even more involved.
Yeah. I agree. And he does this kind of narration thing again in Iron Man 3. I really enjoy voiceover. I know a lot of film people don't like voiceover. They think it's cheap. I think it's really a lot of times very effective, especially if you have an actor as good as Robert Downey Jr. at reading lines and describing scenes to you. This movie, I adore this movie. Like, I think it's so good, and watching it again, like you kind of forget how funny it is, because I mean you understand, like all Shane Black's movies have some humor in it, but this movie is very funny. And it's very it is black humor, but it's also just very sharp and witty, and the way Val Kilmer and Robert Downey Jr. like banter back and forth is so good, and yes. Like reading a Shane Black script, that's like, they're very talented actors, but that's his lines. Like, you can see them reading his lines, and it's so good.
I've never thought of Val Kilmer as a comedic actor before, and I laughed so many times at his like timing and his just perfectly exact delivery of even just something as simple as like Robert Downey Jr. will say something and Val Kilmer will just respond with like, idiot, and but like it's just so perfectly timed and said that I will literally laugh out loud at just that, and that's the level that he's at in this movie.
And I think that's, again, to take it back to Shane Black, I think that says something about him, because in your first directorial feature, he directs this with a lot of confidence, and like he's there's voiceover, there's meta references, it's acknowledging itself as a movie. I think it takes like kind of guts to do that in a movie, especially as your first movie. Like, you're declaring, this is my style, and you're going. This movie jumps fully into the neo-noir type of detective story. Like I said, so much so that it's literally referencing noir detective novels. But he's so confident with it, and you're right that the editing is really sharp. The timing on all the humor just lands perfectly. It's really well done. And it like, this movie did not do it for a lot of money. It did not make a lot of money. This was Robert Downey Jr. was not the household name and huge star that he was, that he is now. This was post his drug problems, and he was just starting to make a comeback. I think this was one of his first movies and his eventual comeback. But it's God, I love it so much. I think this is my favorite Shane Black movie.
Yeah, I think it. Well, yeah, I guess we can talk about that at the end, actually. But yeah, the Robert Downey Jr. really brings this kind of like boyish vulnerability to this performance. That, I mean, he's always got the Robert Downey Jr. thing going on, but I think this is kind of he's not just playing Robert Downey Jr. He's definitely leveraging kind of his twitchy, emotive face that he has. But this is definitely a unique character. I would like to talk about the ending of this movie in particular, sure. and really all the endings of all the movies, because I think they're all worth remarking on. Is just like, they're all kind of, and I think you already essentially said something like this, which is like, they're all not quite what you expect, or quite what you wanted, or quite how you wanted them to end, or quite how you imagined them ending. Like this one, spoilers, I guess. Like, you know he's gonna get with the girl, because that's what always happens. But there's not actually a scene at the end of this movie where you know that he gets with the girl.
Yeah.
Like, she's there at the end, and then there's a conversation, and then there's a different scene that doesn't have both of them in it, and then that's the end of the movie. and I'm like, well, that's definitely intentional, because this movie's too deft and clever to not be intentional. But it's like he's actually withholding from you this one particular kind of catharsis that you were expecting, based on the genre and total self-awareness of the genre. I don't know. Do you see what I mean, or am I kind of reading too much into something that is actually nothing?
No, I definitely agree, and I almost think that Harry is the type of character who he might not actually have gotten with the girl, because he might have ended up screwing it up, because that's just the type of character he is. So I think that you're absolutely right. That was fully intentional. It was meant to kind of. I mean, I think this movie very much lives into those noir tropes, but also kind of turns them on their head. Like, I think the thing I think about is when her the female characters, Michelle Monaghan, I can't remember her name, her sister commits suicide, and everyone's like, oh no, she was definitely murdered. And I think Gay Perry says, no, she just committed suicide. Like, that's just what happens. And like, throughout the entire movie, you're convinced that it's all part of this grand conspiracy, because in any noir story, of course, the beautiful woman didn't commit suicide. Of course, she was murdered. But then in the movie, it's like, no, actually, she just was not a happy person and committed suicide.
Right.
And I think that's very much taking those noir tropes and twisting them. So yeah, I mean, not having the moment where the guy and girl get together in the end was very much intentional. Yeah,
and novel and interesting, and just part of the whole reason why this movie is more than just a noir detective story with some self-referential humor. It's just, yeah, it's a good movie. It's a great movie.
And I really like the stakes in the movie too. They're so small and personal, and Harry Lockhart's change is actually, like, he's a very interesting character who does go through an arc in the film, but it's a very minor arc. He really only just decides, okay, I'm not gonna steal anymore. Like
Right.
I'm just not gonna be a thief. As a person, he's still kind of the same person he is. Like you see that when how he's talking to the audience throughout the movie, and even at the end when it's literally like when Val Kilmer literally reaches up and turns off the camera because he's talking to the camera at the end. So it's not, he doesn't go through this huge, enormous change. He's not a completely different person. He's just incrementally better. And there's something very realistic and relatable about that.
Yeah, and that's one reason why I couldn't ever call this movie like a downer, cynical movie. I mean, it definitely has all these violent things in it, which, that's the genre.
Yeah.
But it ends with him on in a better place than where he started. So
right.
That's good.
And there's a small amount of justice when Perry walks up and just smacks the crap out of the 80-year-old man.
Yeah. Yeah.
See, I really like that scene too, because first of all, I mean, like how this movie navigates tone is remarkable, and I think Shane Black is really good at that across the board, because there's some really terrible stuff that happens in this movie. I mean, the woman's father sexually abuses her little sister for years and years and years. There's murders. Like, I mean, Harry goes from a person who's never killed someone, like that final scene on the bridge, like he's killing people like he's Riggs from Lethal Weapon. Like he's gotten really good at it by the end of the movie. I was almost
considering an interpretation where when he gets shot, he just dies, and the rest of the movie is his like fantasy of him actually turning into a badass and killing all the other guys, because there's actually a fairly sharp jump in his ability to shoot guns at that point.
Yeah.
There's like the most horrible thing to me was when the pink-haired girl gets murdered right in front of him, and the camera just like basically stays on his face as he's just reacting with horror at this thing, that just like truly terrible thing that's happened. And it's not, the tone in that scene isn't like this is an action movie and somebody just got shot and whatever. It's like this is how you would feel if somebody were murdered right in front of you. You would like feel ill.
Yeah, and
that's what he's going through.
And the fact that she doesn't die right away, and like she gives him this look of confusion, and he's kind of got to be like, don't like say anything, don't tell them I'm here.
Right.
But then again, with the navigating of the tone, it goes from that scene. He's still in the same apartment later, and he's like, the dog has eaten his finger.
Right.
I don't know how you navigate tone that well.
I know.
Without just throwing the entire movie off and it spirals out of control. Like, I don't know how you do it, but he does it.
Yeah, I know. This is, in a previous scene, they threw a woman's body off of a building, and you actually like laugh because her body like hits the edge of a dumpster, and it's like, okay, you made me laugh at this horrible violent thing over here, and then you made me cry at this other similar horrible violent thing here. That's kind of masterful.
Yeah. And he'll use that gag again a few years later in The Nice Guys.
Yeah.
So is there anything else you wanted to touch on in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang? I could talk about this movie the entire time. I think there's so many small moments in it that are just so wonderful. But it almost does, like, in the noir sense, it almost does feel like it doesn't really take place in our world. Like it's kind of ethereal, if you get my meaning. Like, it's things happen that don't seem like they would actually happen in the real world. But it is, but at the same time, it's grounded in some places. So I just like, I'm so impressed with his, like, he can't deal with the pressure of Hollywood, of like constantly, like, you know, writing these screenplays, thinking they're really good screenplays, and then having them not perform very well. He steps away for almost 10 years. It was 9 years between Long Kiss Goodnight and this movie. And he comes back in just a big, like, declarative way, like, this is the director and writer that I am. And it's such a wonderful, like, thesis statement on his style.
Yeah, I can't believe that I never saw this movie, and I can't believe that this isn't on, like, all those lists of, like, great movies you have to see, or maybe it is, and I just never, like, really noticed.
It's like it didn't do well, but it has like a cult following now.
Yeah.
But yeah, it should be on more lists. I agree. This should be in the Kryptonian collection.
Yeah, really,
because
everybody knows and loves Lethal Weapon, but I would like call this a movie that I definitely enjoyed more than Lethal Weapon. So
yeah, I agree. All right, so let's move on then to Iron Man 3. This was the 2013 movie. This was the one that came out right after Avengers, so this is the movie that had to follow up the biggest comic book movie in the world. This, everyone talks about how Marvel is not a director's studio, how all of Marvel movies feel samey, and they like it's corporate and there's not really room for creativity. But Iron Man 3 is a Shane Black movie to its core. Like, yes, it takes place within this shared universe. Yes, it has Tony Stark and like big end of the world stakes in it. But really, at the end of the day, this movie is Tony Stark dealing with his post traumatic stress and working through that through the battles he's fighting. And that is such a Shane Black concept. Like this, how you could ever look at this movie, it would be completely different if another person did it. So I refuse to accept that Marvel is not a director studio when you look at this movie.
Yeah, right. I mean, this movie, we go from the other movies where, he's just a superhero to like the first time we see the Iron Man suit, or I may be wrong, but the first time I remember seeing the suit is him having a panic attack for no reason and then just like running out and basically hiding in the suit.
Yeah.
To calm himself down. And it's like that's the kind of emotional tenor that the movie sets from the get-go.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, this is the first time you had seen this film. So, what did you think overall about Iron Man 3?
So, let's see. I'm trying to sort out my thoughts, but one thing was that I found a lot of the action to be confusing. I'm going to lead with the negatives. I found a lot of the action to be confusing, and I was surprised because this was the last of the three that I actually watched. So I had already watched the other two recent ones, and I didn't find any problems at all with the way the action was shot. So I was like, maybe it's because a lot of this is CGI, and so it may not actually be Shane Black who's, quote unquote holding the camera, because it's actually the CGI camera that's swooping through the Stark mansion as it's being hit by CGI rockets or whatever.
Yeah, I would say probably that the majority of the action scenes were either done by like a B crew or a different team. That would not surprise me.
Yeah, there was just a lot of, I don't know, as someone who watches a lot of superhero movies, there's a lot of stuff where like a rocket will hit and like obliterate everything in sight, and then like the people who were standing right next to where the rocket hit are just sort of like knocked aside instead of being pulverized. And then I guess it comes down to nitpicks, but is it really a nitpick if you're just completely taken out of the scene while that's happening? I don't know.
Yeah, probably not.
And none of this is really plot related. Like the plot was fine, and it kept me engaged and interested in the characters, and there were enough kind of independent plot threads going on, because you have basically Tony is having all these anxiety problems, and he's also trying to repair his relationship with his girlfriend, which is very strained because he's not coping with his anxiety very well. And then there's this person from the past, and there's a nicely twisty, complicated plot with the villain played by Guy Pearce, who was so happy to see playing a villain in a Marvel movie.
He's really good. Like, Marvel villains are historically, I think, not great. I really enjoyed him. I think he has proper motivation. I think he gets a little too like same villainy at the end when like the whole, like, I think when he breathes fire and then the final fight, I think, was a little too over the top. But like his motivations as a human being, like the whole backstory with Stark screwing him over, leaving him on top of the roof, and that leading to his turn. I thought that was interesting and well done.
Yeah.
Guy Pearce is great.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how I would rank it in the hierarchy of Marvel movies, and it was really unusual. It's really unusual to be kind of expecting a Marvel movie and then to get a Shane Black movie.
Yeah.
So
And I think
Yeah.
I think the general populace is pretty torn on this for that same reason. I think if you like Shane Black movies a lot, you like this movie a lot. If you came into this specifically to see a Marvel film, you probably are pretty disappointed. A lot of just big Marvel fans hate this movie.
Mm-hmm.
But it is very different. I mean, Tony is not in the suit very often. Like
Right.
he is not doing superhero-esque action very much in this movie at all. Most of it is him dealing with his trauma or solving problems by being just Tony Stark, and that's really interesting. And it's good because I mean, Shane Black had to pick up this character from a certain point already, where Tony had already started going through his arc, and then this really traumatic event happens to him in Avengers movie, and Shane Black had to pick that up and take it somewhere. And I really think we talked about how Robert Downey Jr. didn't have that dramatic of an arc in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. I think he does have a very dramatic arc in this movie where, I mean, he's not fully over his issues, but like him like blowing up the armor and letting it go and realizing that yes, he is Iron Man, but he doesn't need the armor as a crutch. I mean, like the movie, he literally takes out the thing in his heart. He takes out the magnetic thing holding the shards. He goes through fundamental change in this movie, and it's good change.
Yeah. It's good, and definitely watching it at the end of a sequence of Shane Black movies, it was super obvious to me that it was a full-on Shane Black movie. It made me wonder how I would have felt about it if I had seen it in isolation and not in that context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it still like belongs in the Marvel universe. Like I can still very much see the thread of Tony Stark and Iron Man as a character from Iron Man 1 through the 14 Marvel movies we've had now. But it does feel like its very own unique special thing as well. I mean,
Yeah.
and it has like, it ticks all the Shane Black boxes. Like it has the little kid that kind of serves, like Black loves to use children as like a moral compass for our characters, like a living, talking moral compass. It does the Christmas stuff again, which before we move on to our final movie, I wanted to talk to you about his use of Christmas, because I think this is the final movie that he does it in. I don't think The Nice Guys takes place over Christmas, unless I'm wrong. It could. I don't remember seeing any decorations or anything.
I don't recall.
So, what do you think? Why do you think he utilizes Christmas in that fashion? Because it's never like, it's always the backdrop of his films. Like these are never quote unquote Christmas movies. None of the themes really center around things you'd traditionally call a holiday theme. But it always exists like in the background of his movies.
Yeah, it always sort of brings in an interesting tone where the whole tone of the movie would be different if it weren't Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'd have to think about that, because you're right that it's really almost never, like almost no one ever says the word Christmas. It's more like, oh, this person is wearing a Santa suit and people are all sort of orbiting through these Christmas traditions. Maybe some of it is like these characters are all kind of caught up in these violent events, and maybe, people around them in the world at large are celebrating and with their families and so forth, but these characters are in a bad place in their lives, so they're actually just, trying to solve a murder or whatever. They don't have any loved ones, and it sort of makes the characters in the movie who are, like what in whatever the case may be, it may be the guy and the girl, or maybe the two partners who start out hating each other and end up liking each other. Like they kind of become family in the sense that they're the ones who are hanging out during Christmas, and they provide each other with that family that they don't have because, it's Christmas and they're alone, so they need someone. Yeah. I don't know. It's riffing.
No, I think that's all really good points. I think it's like in our calendar of the year, like Christmas is always so unique in that we go through our year day by day. We take everything very much a day at a time in our lives. But like everyone collectively on Christmas kind of stops to recognize this season. And I think playing in that with all these really dark elements it's a very interesting, dichotomy. I also think he just really loves the idea of Christmas in LA is, very traditional, like lights and trees and stuff in a place that's warm and sunny and doesn't see any of the wintry side of it. I think it seems like he likes to play in that. But yeah. I think I agree with your sentiment. I think you're right that these movies would not be the same if they did not take place at Christmas time, even though Christmas time is not a main function of the film. It's just, it kind of works in the comparison and all these terrible things, and you just see Christmas lights in the background, or someone dressed as Santa, or one of your main characters is dressed as a sexy Santa and kiss bang bang. It's just this interesting backdrop that just brings stuff to it, because these terrible things are happening in a time when we're supposed to be loving and reaching out to people and all these things. So I think he just likes playing with that dichotomy. Yeah,
that's a good point. It kind of has to be set at some time of the year, and if it's going to be LA where there's no weather, the only thing you can do to indicate that this movie exists in time and not sort of unmoored from time is to have it coincide with a holiday with a lot of visible trappings.
Yeah, that's also a really good point. Yeah,
there's probably a lot you could say about why put something during the Christmas time, but that's a really interesting observation.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on to the final film, at least so far, for Shane Black. That's this year, 2016's The Nice Guys, which is a 1970s Los Angeles detective story about a mismatched pair of private detectives. Are we noticing a theme here? Uh-huh. They have to investigate a missing girl and the mysterious death of a porn star. Again, a very similar theme. This is the Ryan Gosling and Russell Crowe film that came out this year. I love this movie. It's probably going to be in my top 10 of this year. Again, like, Shane Black has the ability to find two actors when you combine that with his dialogue, like, you just want, this movie could just be Russell Crowe and Ryan Gosling playing off each other for the entire movie, and I think I would like it just as much. Like, their chemistry with each other, their back and forth is just so wonderful and funny, and I don't know. I love this movie. What did you think about it? Because you saw it just for the first time recently.
Yeah, I love this movie. I mean, Ryan Gosling and Russell Crowe are two of my favorite actors in general, but the thing is, I never would have thought that they would have this kind of chemistry, and particularly Russell Crowe. Like, I just don't think of him as being a comic actor, which is funny because I didn't think of Val Kilmer as being a comic actor either.
Yeah.
But they both sort of actually fill a similar niche where they're like this straight man who just thinks the other guy is a moron.
Yeah.
and Ryan Gosling / Downey Jr. both played the guy who is the moron, but lovable. Yeah, this is a hilarious movie. I laughed out loud so many times. And once again, it had kind of an unusual ending where you don't quite get what you were expecting, but it leaves you with a nice feeling. And I think as soon as I saw this, I was like, this is now one of my favorite movies, like, immediately.
Yeah. I want to talk about that ending because that's kind of what I was alluding to earlier. Spoilers for those people who haven't seen it. If you haven't seen it, pause right now, go watch the movie, and then come back. The movie does not end. Our heroes, quote unquote, win, but the bad guys succeed. So they uncover the conspiracy theory, but at the end of the day, nothing really changes. Our two guys end sitting in a bar drinking. One of them, who had quit alcohol, is now drinking again. And a lot of people interpreted this as a negative thing. That this movie is saying that nothing matters. These people these people fought hard, almost died, and nothing really changed. But things did change. Things absolutely changed within both these characters. Ryan Gosling's character is still in a rough place, but he's formed this bond and this relationship with another person, which he had just been completely unable to do that earlier in the movie. He had shown his daughter that he can at least do something right, because Holly March is a character who like loves her father so much and sees so much good in him, but can't help but also feel like he's just a screw up. Like, she writes on his hand, "You will never be happy," and like, but she's doing that to try to like force him into some form of reconciliation, which I think is achieved at the end of the movie, even if they don't save the world, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Am I completely off base here? Or?
No, I think that's all true. I think, Russell Crowe kind of helps pull him out of some of his problems through kind of dragging him on this adventure. And he also kind of provides someone, because Russell Crowe obviously kind of is this like hard guy, but he's obviously like soft on the inside.
Yeah.
And he kind of needs somebody too, but he's never going to admit that, because he's just this tough guy who breaks people's arms. And so they get, they kind of form their own family there. It is like Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, where it ends with them being what the other person needs. The daughter character I thought was, I'm gonna say, maybe the weakest part of this movie. Like,
really?
I kept thinking like that's not realistic that she would behave this way, but that's probably just my own quirk, I guess.
I think you're right. I don't think it's very realistic, but I think it makes sense. Like, she has to be a person that she shouldn't be because her father is useless. Like,
yeah,
he's the guy that passes out on a swimming pool diving board because he's just an alcoholic screw up who's kind of dealing with his guilt over his wife's death, who's dealing with all these different things, and dealing with consistently letting his daughter down. And like, he very much is a person who puts on airs. Like, he thinks he's not being a scummy private eye, but he is. He's taking money from old people. Like, that's what he does. He's living in a house that he can't afford because he can't actually rebuild his other house. Like, and I think she's like I said, she's his conscience, like kind of pushing him and egging him on. And she serves that for Russell Crowe too. Like, she doesn't want him to kill the other man. And like, when he does, like obviously we see change. Russell Crowe kills the blue man, but then at the end of the movie spares the one character because of her influence. So I mean, I guess I can kind of see that, like, she's not a believable. This is not how a child would act in this situation, but I do think the movie at least sets up, like, this is how this child will act because she's had to basically be an adult because of her useless father. Like, she drives them around, and she's 13 years old.
Yeah, that all makes sense. That's fine. I mean, I guess I mentioned things like that just to say, like, as I was watching the movie, it stuck out to me, but also I'm not going to be like, this ruined the movie. It certainly didn't ruin the movie. It was just something where I was like, this is an odd element, and it's odd enough that it's distracting to me. Yeah.
You want to know my favorite scene in the movie?
What?
My favorite scene is when they're back at the house. They're all downtrodden and defeated, and like, Ryan Gosling's daughter is yelling at him about how he's the worst detective ever, and then he has this moment where he's gonna do good, and he like ties things together. It's like, it means the West Burbank Hotel because there's the no flyover rule and everything, and he's like really smart and like very observant, and then the movie immediately like says he's wrong, like right after that. It's just so perfect, because it's this moment of where you think in any other movie is like, he's gonna step up, and it completely destroys that, but then also still allows him to have a moment later. So it still gives him that moment, just not in the way we would expect it. Right.
There's also the only time I think I've ever seen this in a movie or any story period where there's a dream sequence, and then and then the character acts on something that he saw in the dream sequence, which was not in fact true. Much. he in his dream, Russell Crowe shows him his ankle gun that he wears on his ankle, and then later in the movie he tries to go for Russell Crowe's ankle gun, which is not there because that was a dream.
Oh, was that a dream?
Yeah.
I love that scene. You're right. And
Yeah.
like Ryan Gosling, man, he's so good. And he
Yeah.
goes like full like crazy mode here. Like he's screaming like a girl through half of it. Like
Mhm.
he punches the door, he punches the glass out to break into the door and slices his arm open.
That was the oh man, like that's one thing that Shane Black does so well is a scene will be going kind of the way you expect it to go, and then the thief is walking up to the door, or he's not even a thief, he's just a really bad private eye,
Yeah.
and he's like, he wraps his hand and he's gonna punch through the glass, and you're kind of like, it doesn't look like that's gonna work right, and he punches through the glass, it slices his wrist, and there's just blood gushing everywhere,
And then the jump cut to the ambulance.
right.
It's so good.
I laughed so much at
Yeah.
that.
And I like all the small touches too, because like the little girl, after he finishes breaking Ryan Gosling's arm, the girl walks by and hands him a yoo-hoo, and then he likes it and is very excited about it. And the next scene, we cut to him like carrying a case of yoo-hoo into his apartment. Like small stuff like that is little character development moments where like this is a guy like that defines him as a softie, because he's like this guy that he had a yoo-hoo and was so excited about it because he hadn't had it in 3 decades that he went out and bought a huge case of it, and then it immediately gets all broken.
Yeah, by the
sad.
hitman.
Yeah.
And then, if anything, the thing that makes you hate the hitman is that they broke his yoo-hoos, not that they killed that poor woman.
Yeah. Did they like in that scene, like when they shoot at him and the woman in the background gets shot? Like, are we supposed to think she's dead?
I don't know. I forgot that happened.
It's really just dealt with that very casually.
That's kind of the speaking of like these movies happening in an ephemeral world. There's the scene where the Johnny Boy goes to their house and pulls out a Tommy gun.
Yeah.
And they have a huge shootout in the middle of a suburban street, and of course no one else comes out of their houses, and there's no other reaction at all to the fact that there's this massive shootout in the street and a tree is shot down. And so it's almost like it's just kind of this silly, it's intentionally kind of putting you in this space where there are consequences, but there aren't really, in terms of collateral damage. The movie's just kind of saying like, yeah, we realize that there would be collateral damage, but we're not really going to pay attention to that.
Yeah, it's. I think it's part of that noir type thing. I think it's interesting that this, when he originally wrote this film, it did not take place in the 70s, and it wasn't until a different producer got involved that they retooled the movie to take place in the 70s. And I'm kind of so thankful that they did that, because it cements its throwback to those like detective type television shows with like the kind of screw up detective, and the grittiness of the 70s just works so well with that. And the thing I think of the most, like that opening shot where the camera flies over the Hollywood sign from the back and you see like it's covered in graffiti and kind of falling apart. I think like small touches like that just add to the atmosphere of like this whole thing is, this world is terrible. It's awful. The bad guys win a lot, but if you can make these kind of human connections with people, you'll do okay. And that's really the message of this movie, I think.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting because I wasn't sure. I wanted to ask or look this up, but I didn't do this beforehand. But like, did the Hollywood sign actually look all decrepit and broken down back in the 70s, and like it got fixed up again later, or was that just our like indicator that the first scene in the movie is this shot of the Hollywood sign looking completely destroyed, and it's like, okay, so this is like a fantasy version of reality where Hollywood really is this like cesspit that it's depicted as in noir type material.
Apparently, I just looked this up. In 1978, the Hollywood sign was torn down and replaced because it was falling apart.
Okay, well then this was not a fantasy realm, but it was a perfect bit of set dressing to kind of show you the type of world you're flying into.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we conclude, which is this your favorite Shane Black movie? I mean, what would be your favorite? And you can go directed by or written by.
Well, yeah, I just saw them so close together. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang probably like affected me more in terms of just being delightful in every way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. They're really close. I'm definitely going to watch them again because I love them both so much. But they're both really, really good.
Yeah, I actually go back and forth between those two, and it's really whichever I've seen most recently, at least because like I've called Kiss Kiss Bang Bang one of my favorite movies for a very long time. I saw The Nice Guys, and I was like, I think I like this more. And then I watched Kiss Kiss Bang Bang again, and I was like, no, I like that more. The last one I watched before sitting down to record with you was The Nice Guys, so I love that movie so much, and I'm kind of bummed that it just like for whatever reason, like with the exception of Iron Man, like these Shane Black movies just don't do very well. I don't know if they're not marketed properly or just like the audience isn't there anymore. Like this movie was in theaters for like 2 weeks before they pulled it out. It was like it didn't get a very good chance like to do well. I really hope, like the other movies, it kind of gets its own cult following, which is why I say things like we need to talk about it. So hopefully people listen to this that missed that movie when it was in theaters, give it a chance now.
Yeah, I do feel like they're not advertised properly or marketed properly or whichever, because Kiss Kiss Bang Bang came out in 2005. So I was definitely like a cognizant human being who was seeing movies at that point in time.
But you don't remember it at all.
But I don't remember it at all. I don't remember anything. Like I don't remember seeing a single bit of like it was okay, let me put it this way. It was a shock to me that Robert Downey Jr. was in this movie. It was a shock to me that Val Kilmer was in this movie. Like that shouldn't be permitted for a big, a big Hollywood movie. Like you should, every eye in America should be inundated with the images of your main actors and the movie title and like at least enough of the aesthetic for you to get a sense of what kind of movie it is. But I knew nothing about this movie. So it's like, if I just consider myself kind of a random person of my demographic, I'm like exactly the demographic this movie should be aimed at. And yet I hadn't seen anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, I agree. I think I think a movie like that, it's difficult to market because who is that going for? Especially nowadays, like where these kind of movies, like sadly, like I love comic book movies and the big blockbuster movies, but sadly that's most of what does well now. Like a movie like The Nice Guys is kind of out of time in that it belongs to a different era.
Mm-hmm.
Both figuratively and literally because it takes place in the 70s. But I hope it finds an audience on home video or something. If you haven't seen it, listeners, please check out this movie. I promise you will enjoy it.
Yeah, it really is remarkable.
So that's Shane Black. Before we conclude, I just wanted to look forward to the future a little bit because we're doing one of these things on a director who is very much still working. Shane Black, his next project is the Predator reboot. He's both writing and directing this movie. I think it's in pre-production right now. I guess that's one thing we didn't mention is that Shane Black was in the original Predator movie. He was one of the first characters to die. He had a very small role in the film as person who dies first. But that's really one of the first things he did. So it's kind of cool that he now is helming the start of the reboot of the franchise. There was a rumor that this movie was going to take place in the suburbs around Christmas time, which would be a very Shane Black thing to do. But apparently that's not true. So we know very little about this movie other than his involvement. But I'm excited. I think I don't know what his take on a Predator movie would be, but also like I didn't know what his take on an Iron Man movie would be, and that turned out pretty good. So I kind of have utmost faith in him at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite excited about this idea actually, just because really strip away all of his motifs and everything. He's just really competent at writing and character and directing and making you feel for things that are happening on the screen. So you could give him any franchise really, and he's not going to drop the ball on character. He's not going to drop the ball on getting you invested in the stakes. So this is wonderful because it's like, hey, we haven't had a Predator movie where we cared about the stakes since Predator 2. So
that's true. And then the other thing, this has just been announced that he's going to be writing and directing Doc Savage, starring Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson as Doc Savage. I know nothing about this movie. I really know nothing about the character other than he was kind of the forerunner to modern comic book superhero movies, like or superheroes in general. Like he existed before Superman and Batman and all of these, and kind of defined what those characters would be. So I don't know. This was just announced. The news when I was looking up on this was from months ago, so I don't know if it's current or if this movie's still actually happening. But that's apparently what is the word on the street. So there you go. Take Shane Black and combine him with The Rock, and
yeah, he's basically Indiana Jones, except even more so.
Yeah,
seems like.
Yeah. So and I'm sure he'll work on many other things. I do appreciate that he's never really done a sequel. Like he's always moved on to different characters and different stories. Like I said, he almost did with Lethal Weapon, and maybe that experience just completely turned him off to it, and he didn't want to deal with that anymore. But
yeah,
I appreciate that.
He seems like the kind of storyteller who appreciates the idea of completing an arc, and then that's it. That was the story. So yeah.
All right, so that's Shane Black. This was really fun. I really enjoyed. Like, I think I enjoy this recurring series more than any because I get to sit down and watch like 8 movies and try to find the commonalities and links between them. And normally we pick directors we really like, so it's a very enjoyable experience. We'll have to figure out who we want to do next. I know you and I have been talking behind the scenes about some of the different directors we can do and how that's all going to work out. But this was good.
Yeah.
Matt, before we go, did you have anything that you've been watching that you want to talk about really quick, or besides Shane Black movies?
Just real quick, and this is very sad for me to admit, but I've been watching Star Trek: The Next Generation because it's on Netflix, and like I was showing my wife because she was never really a fan of it. I was like, okay, these are the best episodes. I'm just going to show you the top episodes. And I'm having a really hard time because the show really doesn't hold up that well.
It really doesn't. It's very slow. I mean, there are some good episodes in there, I will admit. But yeah, I rewatched a lot of them recently, and it is very slow. And it's very, like, we grew up, Star Trek: The Next Generation was my Star Trek. And I've gone back and watched the original series since then. But they're so different. I didn't even realize that. I just assumed that this was just old Star Trek, but with a newer cast, and they're just very different shows.
Yeah, it's a very kind of unique show. Like I'm actually watching, and I'm just like surprised that it was ever successful. Even, I mean, that's so weird for me to say because I actually love Next Generation, and I love so many of the characters. But like any given episode, you're like, okay, this first 20 minutes could have been skipped. Like it's really really unusual. And I guess at that time in history it wasn't that unusual because there were things like Quantum Leap on TV which were equally slow, and now we're just used to this hypercharged HBO like modern age of television. Maybe, I don't know.
Maybe, yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I kind of agree with you though, and it's sad because I still love the characters. But yeah, it doesn't hold up. I think the series finale is still pretty good though. I like that episode a lot.
Yeah, there's definitely a handful where I still think they're great. It's just when I'm showing them to my wife, I'm like, I can see why she.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, let me explain the context. Yeah. Yeah. But how about you? Did you see anything recently?
Yeah. So last week I saw Manchester by the Sea. This is we briefly talked about it on the podcast last week. In that it's doing very well, but I hadn't seen it yet.
Okay.
Matt, I love this movie so much. It's like, there are these movies, these indie films that always do very well critically, and I usually end up liking them, but it's more of like I appreciate them as art less than I really get into the movie on an emotional level, and it really just works on me. This movie though did. And it's it's sad, it's devastating. It's a movie about grief and how you deal with grief, and the performances are just wonderful. Casey Affleck, like, he's gonna get nominated for an Oscar. I really think he should win it. Like, this, like, it's not like the big showy Oscar type performance. It's just like, it's so expertly done and how muted and quiet his performance is. But it was so impacting, and God, it's such a good movie. I really recommend it for anyone that hasn't seen it. And I know, like, it sounds like it's the pretentious movie recommendation, but it's masterful filmmaking. It really is.
Yeah, I've heard people say it was like the best movie of the year, so that definitely piques my interest.
It's really, like, I'm working on my top 10 list right now, and it's up there.
Okay.
I don't know where it'll eventually land, but wow. It's rough to watch. It's very emotional, but it's wonderful.
All right, I'll have to check that out as soon as possible.
Absolutely, and everyone out there should as well. All right, so that's our episode for this week. Matt, where can you be found on the internet?
Oh, primarily on Twitter at @MoreThanAMail.
Hey, I'm on Twitter too, at
right.
ScottDaly85, DALY. It's funny, we're like 30 something days from our wedding, and I'm talking to my fiance and explaining to her how every time she's going to say her last name now, she's going to have to spell it, because everyone just naturally spells Daly wrong, because I don't blame him, but there's no I in there, so I'm just very used to saying Daly and then saying DALY, and teaching her that she's going to have to do that. But anyway, the information on this podcast and everything else we do can be found on our Daly Planet Films Twitter. That's at Daly Planet Films, or you can go to dalyplanetfilms.com. You can also follow us on Facebook. That's also Daly Planet Films. If you like what we do and want to support us, you can go to our Patreon page and give us $1 a month or whatever else you can afford to help us. We have to rent some of these movies that we don't already own that aren't free on streaming, so any money you could provide will be great. But if you can't give money, if you could just share the podcast, like it, subscribe to it, review it, and the more reviews we have, the higher up on those lists it will be. And I think Matt, we can, like, both Stitcher has its own review. I know iTunes does. It's kind of convoluted, but I think most other podcasting apps have their way to review it. So if people could just take the time to do that, that would be awesome. And we'll read them. We'll read your review. You'll be famous, sort of.
Yeah, sort of. We really do appreciate that.
Absolutely, absolutely. We really like doing this, and we hope people like listening to it. And if you could show us how much you like it, that'd be awesome. Anyway, Matt, I think next week is Kryptonian Collection, right? I think it is. Yeah. So we'll be here next week with a new movie and a new challenger, and we'll see if this movie is as good as any of these Shane Black movies. I hope someone nominates a Shane Black movie, Matt. I really do. Yeah. Well, now that they know that we're asking for that, it's kind of it's kind of a way to cheat it into the collection. But yeah. Anyway, Matt, this was fun, and for everyone else out there, we will see you next week. Podcast is over. It's done. We hope you all had some fun. Go back to your work or your school. Maybe the gym. Hey, that's cool. Regardless, just go away. But please come back next Friday. There'll be